Forgive me for the candor of this opening gambit, but I think it's safe to say that I don't really stay abreast of how the wider community categorizes this kind of thing, if I'm being honest, so take this for the baseless speculation it is, but I think it's generally accepted that we're in something of a new era for shonen series following the release of Attack on Titan back in 2013. It's kind of like what Sword Art Online did for the popularization of the isekai genre, and the subsequent fall of the West it was directly responsible for, if you think about it. It seems like this is the tenor of the times, where you can have darker themes and graphic violence, and things are more prone to whip-crack changes in tone than they were before Eren's mother got eaten on screen by a member of the insane clown posse. Now we've got series that don't shy away from absurd, horrific violence and more openly tragic, bleak themes. Your Jujutsu Kaisens, your Chainsaw Mans, your Maids in Abyss. Wait a minute, it says here that Abyss is seinen. I don't understand these rubrics, but I don't begrudge that, really. Sometimes throwing dark is an excellent way to make things matter. The trick is in how you use it. That's not to say, of course, that DanDaDan, star and subject of this review both, is particularly dark. I mean, well, unless it wants to be, and occasionally when it doesn't seem to want to be, but is anyway. It's a mashup of genres and tones as much as it is a unique and compelling mashup of subject matters, like how Doom took demons from fantasy and cyborgs from science fiction and slapped them together. Unlike that, however, DanDaDan combines yokai from fantasy and aliens from oh god damn it, wait a minute. I'm kidding, obviously. It's only mostly like Doom. Fundamentally, it's a Gyaru meets Otaku rom-com, but thrown into the dishwasher along with a DVD box set of all the Men in Black films, a modern reproduction of the Hyakai Zukan, and several kilograms of methamphetamines. I know, it's trite to say that something's like a normal thing, but this time gone absolutely off the deep end on crack, but, well, fine. You want a clever analogy? DanDaDan is to Dress Up Darling what penis music is to Debussy's Sweet Burger Mask. No. Hang on. I'll workshop that. Yeah. You know, maybe that's a more fitting metaphor than I anticipated. Momo Ayase is the Gyaru, which is a cliche I think we can all get behind, whose grandmother is a spiritual medium, and she doesn't believe in the existence of aliens. Ken Takakura is the nerdy little otaku dweeb who, like all dorky otaku characters, hits a little too close to home at times, and has a staunch faith in aliens whilst disbelieving the existence of the supernatural. They each bet the others wrong, they both promptly run afoul of their respective naysayees, and suddenly we've got a cursed little dude and a girl with incredible alien psychokinetic powers teaming up to fix all the garbage they just made happen, whilst also falling in love with each other. You know, I explain it with a pithy little bit of baby talk as a showcase for my upcoming ASMR collection. Babbling psychotic freak tells you about romance anime series at gunpoint, look for it on Audible. But the characters are really by and large all very pleasant and great fun to boot. Momo and Ken, or Okarun as he most often goes by, are fantastic together. After the first couple of episodes, during which I was wondering if the shtick of him hollering about aliens and being a freak until he reached the verge of tears before becoming honest about how much he disliked himself, only to cut the pathos with a knife by saying Momo's a shithead, would repeat itself. But fortunately they leave that part behind pretty quickly to get into the electrifying, exhilarating pastures of the more standard I'm too weak, gotta get buff shtick, which I found much more palatable. Even the characters that come in later, Airi and Gigi for instance, are welcome additions to the cast, even though their inclusion threatens to turn the nice happy action rom-com into a love quadrangle, which is something I've had a pathological fear of since I watched a few episodes of Gamers back when it aired. Apparently, in addition to everything else they do, Gamers are also incredibly prone to convoluted misunderstanding-driven romance comedy. Who knew? But I don't care for that. Fortunately, where Gamers stumbles, DanDaDan excels. Every time I thought a misunderstanding was about to happen and make the show a lot shitter for a bit, the characters would get together and actually talk through what happened, and every time I howled into the sky with relief like that Japanese game show contestant who bit into a door handle. It's a really pleasant element to the show, not just in how the core cast members interact with each other, but also just how nice the characters are to other people in general. I noticed this watching Kaiju number 8 too. There's something to be said about a cast who get on really wholesomely. I'm sure it'll make it sad when someone gets their entire head exploded like in that one scene from Scanners, but you spend all season worrying about when your favourite bestie'll bite it. You can't enjoy the moments you have with them, can you? Important life lesson, isn't it? There, you happy, commenter who said I didn't talk enough about existential stuff in the Spice and Wolf review and instead spent it being too horny for Hollow? We're all gonna die someday, but if you think about it, that's okay. There. Now that I've enriched us all spiritually, let's move on. The voice acting's as superlative as the characters. Momo's VA, Shion Wakayama especially. Some of her lines feel almost improvisational at times, not that I have literally any way of knowing that, of course. Regardless, she performs her role fantastically, and we always love Ayane Sakura typecast as the designated side piece for high school rom-coms as she is, and also Miyamoto Musashi. I'd be lying if I said the voice acting's half the reason why the show's so fun to watch, but you might believe me for a few moments before going, I don't think those numbers add up, man. It's animated really nicely too. It's extremely cartoony and over the top when it's shooting for levity, and it presents the serious moments with the gravity they deserve, but give me a paragraph to talk about the animation before I get bogged down in discussing the tone of this thing. It's brought to us by Science Saru, the team who were behind Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, and I think they've done a really good job blending the Western anime hybrid style they employed there to enhance the goofiness of the characters here. The opening especially conveys that sense of mixed influence as well, which I suppose goes hand in hand with the whole sci-fi and folklore thing the series is predicated on. It's very consistent, well-considered theming. And speaking of themes, the opening theme by Creepy Nuts, previously of Mashal's second opening fame, is excellent too. Initially it's, I hesitate to say psychedelic, because I've already done the but on drugs bit, but it's definitely a barrage of amelodic high tones and rapid-fire bizarre imagery that transitions into a more typical, kind of nostalgic melody, which captures the show's emotional tone very well, whilst also just being incredible fun to listen to. And now I can talk about tone. So, tonally, and we're going to match the arc of the show in the arc of the delivery of my narration in this review, it's more of a mixed bag, and this is where the positives start having big asterisks next to them. It is, as I've said before, a fairly light-hearted show, and it is a comedy, but it occasionally veers so hard into the territory of the insanely uncomfortable that I, at times, had trouble comprehending how it got so dark so quickly. There was a point where I, stunned into silence, broken only by the occasional nervous laugh, thought, how do we get back to funny haha goofs after this? This was, of course, a question promptly answered by the narrative going back to goofs with a surprisingly smooth transition, so it shows what I know, I suppose. In watching DanDaDan, I was reminded of the Yakuza series, or perhaps I should call it the Like a Dragon series now, in how it wildly veers between dramatic main story beats and goofy nonsense side quests. Only, you know, the opposite.
Konnichiwa, Steven Spielberg des.
It's mostly goofy, with occasional bouts of insane tragedy. Gintama does something similar, and I recall it being surprisingly effective there, too. I'm aware this is a time-worn observation, but it does bear repeating. You'd think the two tones would clash together something fierce, only for the two wildly different experiences to be almost complementary, let alone simply working. Of course, your mileage may vary, and I don't think that's ever more apparent than in the closing few minutes of the first episode of the series, in a section that I have been wondering how I was going to tactfully word since the moment the thought of reviewing this thing floated into my mind around the time I was 6 shots of rum deep into the first episode. So as we said previously, Momo gets herself abducted by aliens and is strapped to a table in her underwear as 3 very creepy looking aliens in skin suits crowd around her and shoot her with the horny beam, whilst talking about how they intend to do things of a perverse nature and also steal her reproductive organs or something to that effect. It's played for comedy, but that in and of itself makes the scene almost harder to swallow, especially when the camera is basically leering at her. My emotional wavelength was a sine wave that entire sequence. The rapid jumps between, oh no, oh thank God, oh no, oh okay good, oh no, left me exhausted afterwards. Now, I don't mean to say that it doesn't serve at least some kind of purpose, and it is funny, if mostly owing to how over the top it is. It's got a very entertaining resolution, and it gets the plot moving, but for an inciting incident, it's insane. I didn't know if I was laughing because what I was watching was ridiculous, or because my brain briefly broke the surface of the stupor it usually exists in, and actually turned a chair backwards and sat down on it before asking me if we could be real for a couple of minutes. Christ though, I'm glad it doesn't do that more often. A line from Crowshaw's review of Bayonetta always stuck with me, so allow me to badly paraphrase him here. Just because you're being ironically fetishistic, that doesn't mean someone isn't getting off to it. That said, despite what I said earlier, I wouldn't say I was particularly affected by the sequence. I'm too terminally exposed to this kind of thing to be turned off by it, especially when I recognize it is in service to the plot. At least, partly. But I'd know a few correspondents of correspondents who dropped the show then and there, and I struggle to say I blame them for it. It's a high bar to clear for the casual watcher, I'll give them that much. You've got to be pretty annulled to anime bullshit for this not to raise any eyebrows. Fortunately, I've been mainlining this junk for well over a decade now. Full body hemorrhaging is a small price to pay, I think. But on top of that rather bold opener, there's also a genuinely haunting episode about the tragedy of a single mother attempting to raise her child whilst drowning in debt, depicted with unflinching brutality and authenticity, all conveyed without a single joke to lighten the mood. The entire sequence had me sitting in my chair wondering if somehow I'd accidentally streamed an episode from the most depressing anime ever created. Turns out it wasn't Welcome to the NHK, it was just a tonal shift so violent I physically felt the whiplash. Again though, and this is critical, I won't say it didn't work, and I think that really speaks to the strengths of DanDaDan and series like this that are willing to wildly oscillate between tones. The levity makes the serious moments hit harder, and the serious moments ground the comedy. Things matter here, and characters care about each other, and there's real consequences to the actions that people take. The theme of the series, having miraculously for once not read the source material, seems to be echoing one of the sentiments that really stuck with me from Final Fantasy IX. You don't need a reason to help people. It's one of the big reasons I love Natsume's Book of Friends so much. There's a lot of affirmative, positive narrative moments in this series, which gives it more weight than just a dumb comedy. It's a very well animated, charismatic, funny show, warts and all. It shines, in fact, in a great deal of ways. It's easy to see why it was so well received. I'm definitely looking forward to where it goes next, and fortunately we don't have too long to wait, and there are a lot of ways it could go. The romance element between Okarun and Momo is genuinely quite sweet to watch. They're fantastic fun together. The fact it's laden in cliché is counterbalanced by the fact that everything else has a coin toss's chance of going completely off the rails at any given moment. There's a jaunty off-kilter enthusiasm behind this thing that's as profoundly contagious as it is bizarre, from the soundtrack to the animation to the narrative itself. The kind of thing you can tell at least somebody had fun working on, he says, trying not to think about the state of the industry as he does so. The whole series just constantly exudes a sense of exuberance and fun, save the parts that made me want to cover the screen, either because it was too depressing to look at or because I was scared my great-grandfather's ghost would see what I was watching and be terribly disappointed in me. Or maybe he'd be crazy into it, you never know. Wild card was old Pep Pep. It's all put together in a very compelling way. It's just a very good show. The darker parts help that message ring out clearer, I think, because as I said back at the start of this review, throwing dark is an excellent way to make things matter. The trick's in how you use it. Oh, also it ends on a cliffhanger for the second season of the show that's going to be hitting in July this year abouts, but the ending's about as jarring as the introduction. I guess you could charitably call it a tonal bookend, but well, perhaps if you've not seen it, as much as I like it, you'd do better to just wait until the second season's out. Kinda just stops, fairly unceremoniously at that. I'd never do that. Of course, I always end my reviews on the perfect note. So in Kaiju number 8, the thing that really